Are we on? Welcome to the program. We're so pleased that you could come today via person or via Zoom. I'm Joyce Orman, the host for today's program, A Chosen Path. Please silence your phones or put them on vibrate. Those on Zoom, please keep your mic muted unless you are telling, and remember, your camera is on. We can see everything you do right in front of the audience. So turn it off if you don't want us to know what you're up to. The Sacramento Storytellers Poetry, the Sacramento Poetry Center, please welcomes you. The Sacramento Storytellers Guild is dedicated to storytelling and listeners alike, because a storyteller must have a listener. Otherwise, it's like the tree that falls in the forest. It doesn't make a sound. I love to have an audience in front of me. It's the best. What happens between the audience and the teller is magical. The Guild supports all tellers, from beginners or pre-beginners to professionals. So please go onto our website, sacramentostorytellers.org, and learn more about our organization and other storytelling events. A chosen path. A chosen path, once taken, may be many things. It can be long, it can be short, in time or meaning. It can be good or bad in time of living. It can be life-changing or life-deafening of the future. It can be taken as safe or challenging to your existence. Think what has been your chosen path. Our first teller today is going to tell us about the right path. Please welcome Dave Tarvin. Hey. Welcome, Dave. Mute.
Can't hear you.
There we go. We can hear you.
No, we can't.
Dave's just muted.
I can't hear him. Dave's muted. No.
Here, let me hang. Try it again.
There we go.
Yeah.
How's that?
It's good.
Just one moment, I dropped my timer. Oh, I broke the timer. Oh, man.
What a good excuse that.
Well, maybe I won't talk too long. But actually, as I was preparing to tell this story, I mean, this is a first-person story, and this is a true story. I realized that this year, actually, this story took place 30 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And so actually the story starts in the middle of a cafetorium. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a cafetorium is, they are in schools. They are like a multi-purpose room. It's the cafeteria. They take the chairs out. It's an auditorium. It's a multi-purpose room. It's a whatever. And on this particular day, I was there because of my work. Now, at the time, I worked in a psychiatric hospital in the Bay Area. And when I went to work that morning, I immediately was called into the nurse's office, the head nurse's office, and they said, oh, geez, there's this big crisis at the local high school. Some boy died in a tragic accident. A lot of kids watched the boy die, and the principal has asked people to come out and do some grief counseling with the kids. And so I agreed to do it, and I drove to the high school, and when I got there, the principal was there, and he told us all the story, and then they set up these tables. There was about 10 counselors, therapists, different people from different parts of mental health. And they set us up in these little circles. And so the kids started coming through, and so they put out this announcement, kids come walking in. Now, in that moment, I was feeling really good about myself. I thought, you know, I worked hard to get there, and I had. Mental health was my second career. I worked in construction most of my life. My father was a contractor. I grew up on a construction job. Before I could walk, my father would take me to work with him. But when I was hit 30 years old, my life changed, and so did my values. And I decided that I would choose a different path. And so I went to college, and I eventually went to work in mental health. But I had to work pretty hard. There were lots and lots of sacrifices. And so I thought, here I am in this huge crisis, and I'm doing something good. I felt proud of that. And all those kids filtered in those little groups, circles of chairs, they all started to fill up. And every group was filled except for mine. Not one kid sat in my group. Well, I didn't know what to think of that, but I'll tell you this, I didn't feel good about it. In that moment, I thought, you made a poor choice, Dave. All these sacrifices, all this stuff for what? Nobody cares. Not doing any good. And as I sat there feeling sorry for myself, all of a sudden I saw across the room, the door pop open, and this woman came running in, some school person. She scanned the room and she saw me, and she made a beeline for me. She came right up to me and she said, "Hey, I am the school counselor, and I got a really big problem. Can you help me?" Well, I wasn't thinking real clearly. I was kind of caught up in my own stuff, and I just said, sure, whatever, and I got up and I followed her through the school, still thinking about, unpleasant things in my head. And anyways, the next thing I know, I was ushered into this room. And she walks across the room and she sits down in her desk, and then there's this empty chair to my left, and on the other chair, there's another chair on the right. And in that chair sat a 16-year-old girl. I sat in the unoccupied chair, and I thought, "Dave, what are you doing here? There's no reason for you to be here." And the counselor, all of a sudden, she started talking to the girl in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. And as she was talking away, I thought, this is crazy, Dave. How did you get here? Why are you here? People don't know you. You could get up and you could just walk out that door. Nobody even knows your name. And I almost did it. I thought about it seriously. But then somewhere in the back of my head, there was this little voice, and I was pretty sure it was my father's voice, saying, "You chose this. You chose this." So I just sat there, and that school counselor turned to me and she says, "So this is the deal." She said, "This young lady's boyfriend has been missing for 10 days. Nobody knows where he is. We're all worried about him. We think that something bad, really bad, has happened to him. And she knows where he is, but she won't tell anybody." Everybody in the community, everybody has talked to her, and she refuses to tell where her boyfriend is. She said she refused to talk to the police, the priest, the principal, everyone. I was like, what the heck do you expect me to do? I looked at her and I thought, again, that little thing came up about you could get out of here. So I said, "Hey, I don't speak Spanish." She said, "I'll translate for you." That was a big challenge. I was used to doing crisis intervention with kids, but we at least spoke the same language. And again, I heard that little voice in my head, "You chose this." So I looked over at that girl, and she was not happy, boy. When I looked at her, we locked eyes, and she gave me this dirty look, man. But I'd seen that look before. So I just started talking. And actually, I don't remember exactly what I said. But I did what I usually did when I worked with kids. I just told her the truth. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't tell her what was right or wrong. I just told her the truth about what it means to be a human being and what it means to make choices. And that each and every choice, no matter how small or how large, has consequences that may affect the rest of your life. or the lives of others. Well, I was about 5 minutes into my little spiel, and that girl, she just broke down crying. The tears came, and she turned to that counselor, and she told her where that boy was, which was a good thing, because it turned out that that boy had been kidnapped and was being held high up in the mountains in a cabin. The next thing you know, they're calling the police and all this stuff is happening, and they didn't need me anymore. So I left. I finally walked through that door out of that office. I started walking down the hall. I realized I felt better about myself and my choices and about what I had done. And as I was walking through that hallway in that school, we were way in the back of the school at that point. The bell went off, for in classes, in between classes, and all those kids came pouring out of those classrooms. And I came to the intersection of the hallways. So I was trying to get back to my car. And I wasn't sure which way I should go. Should I go to the left, to the right, straight ahead? And then I realized it didn't really matter which way I turned or which way I went, because I was on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And you can understand why we have him as a treasurer of the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. And what a great story to start off A Chosen Path. Now, my next storyteller has been born and raised in Sacramento. She is a poet, but this is her very first time telling a story. Will you please welcome Vicki Carroll?
Thank you. Hi. Hi. Today I'm going to tell you a story about when I was a Wingo spy. It was the mid-'80s. I was still a sweet young thing, and Sacramento had two papers, the Sacramento Union and the Sacramento Bee. I was working my way through nursing school, and I got a hot tip that the Sacramento Bee was hiring for part-time evening work. So I hightailed it down there, met up with other applicants and the supervisor who explained the job to us. We were to park our cars down by the vicinity of the Sacramento Union and watch the drivers load their vehicles. Then when they started to leave, they went their different spots. We were to get in our car and go to a place close by our house to buy a paper and then call in the numbers. And we were to start that night. So we all met up at Harry's Bar and Grill over at 4th and L. That was a perfect place because you could see the Sacramento Union across the street, and it was kind of down lower than the street. We could watch them loading the trucks on the loading docks. So we watched, and the Sacramento Union started in 1851, and it was the first daily paper this side of the Mississippi. So they were also famous for hiring Samuel Clemens, AKA Mark Twain, as a reporter. The papers were always in rivalry ever since the Sacramento Bee opened in 1857. And they were always trying to get increased circulation. The Sacramento Union mailed every household in Sacramento County Wingo cards. And Wingo was like a game bingo. And 5 days a week, you could look in the paper and check your card to see if your numbers were in the paper. And if they were, you could win money. So that was a great thing. Wingo, the Sacramento Bee took them to court so that they could publish the numbers. And they won. So that's how I got this job in the first place. And I went to a place, oh, shoot. That's how I got this job in the first place. So after about a week of us, watching the Sacramento union drivers, they kind of figured out what we were doing. And to show us they knew, they filled up water balloons. And instead of leaving, they made a U-turn. They came past us and pelted us with water balloon after water balloon after water balloon. We were wet. And when we got home from work, we were also chaffed. Yeah, so then that went on for a few days. They changed their routes around and we were late every night getting the numbers to the pressmen. Another time we were out there in front of Harry's wearing our work clothes, t-shirt, jeans, scuffy tennis shoes. A friend of a friend saw me out there and he called our friend and said, you better talk to Vicky because she's doing something out there and I don't think it's good. She didn't look right. And she's standing out in front of a bar and I don't know if it's drugs or maybe something worse. You better talk to her. So my friend did call me and we had a great laugh on that one when I told him I was gainfully employed as a Wingo spy for the Bee. Now that was a really fun job for me. And at first I was apprehensive to take it, but it turned out to be perfect to go to school with. And I stayed there until I graduated from nursing school. And anytime I think of me being a Wingo spy till this day, I do laugh or smile. So thank you. And
Thank you, Vicki. That's a great story. We've been working on that. An extra applause, please. It's always the hardest. I'm very pleased to welcome a poet. Now, I don't know her. This is my first time meeting her today, and I hope I don't mess up her name. Please welcome Marcia Elhinger.
Hello, everybody. Poets get to use cheat sheets, so hopefully you'll see my face during this. Joyce said that we're talking about a chosen path, and this is what came to mind when I thought about mine. And this is a spoken word piece just for today called Girls Don't Do That. I'm 6 years old, church choir cherub, learning Jesus is love, do good, gowned, golden curls and a halo. Before the elders, I say, I will be a medical missionary, help others. Girls don't do that. Be the doctor's wife, teach Sunday school. 1959, watching The Flying Doctor, TV adventure show about the land down under. My friend Anne says, I will fly the plane. I will be the doctor. She says, Dad, I want to be a pilot. No, girls don't do that. Later, Brother Rick took flying lessons. I listened to my mother. She's 6 years old. Mom and younger sisters left fatherless, plunged into the Great Depression. During college in World War II, no father or brothers back home, she strode into the recruiting office and said, I will serve my country. Uniformed in New York City, marching proudly through the Bowery, bums spat on her. Broads don't join the army, only lesbians and whores. 50 years ago, Los Angeles, my birthplace, travel destination, crisscrossed by freeways, melting pot of millions, teamed with contrasts and contradictions, where concrete river channels channel the rainwater away from the thirsty land. A massive edifice rose above the asphalt, dam-like monument to 1930s work projects. Great Stone Mother, the county hospital protects and serves as 60 new souls take a breath each day. In my med school class, I'm drawn to those women and children. I will help them. What path to choose? Obstetrics and gynecology, pregnancy and women's health, OBGYN, controlled by old white men, selecting appropriate young white men, a boys' club, no girls allowed. Women docs picked pediatrics, babies and children, all ages and stages. Things began to change. We called it incremental progress. Pediatric backup, stat. Now, delivery room 3, fetal distress. OB needs help with that baby. Gloves, gown, mask. I rushed to the task, a doctor in disguise, intruding female in OB's eyes. Get out, I heard him shout. Did not see him rise from the perineum. Bam, I hit the tile wall, bounced, but did not fall. Pediatric backup needed, delivery room 2, repeat C-section, a new hospital. I hurried to change. Dressing room doors said doctors and nurses. I picked the first with some doubt. Half-dressed man yelled, get out, launched a volley of curses. I went to the other room. I was the other. Pediatric backup needed, delivery room 1, VBAC, vaginal delivery after a previous C-section. Gloves, gown, mask, I rushed to the task. A pregnant health caregiver assisting a pregnant woman giving birth. My own baby bulge peeking from beneath my gown. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your help. Competence, compassion, collaboration. Yes, girls do indeed do that.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Now, our next teller, the reason I'm reading this instead of just ad-libbing is because we're on the time. In her 43-year career as a children's librarian, Terry Chacon, our next teller, told stories to children in Baltimore and Sacramento. In retirement, she began telling to adults, and she loves it. Please welcome Terry Chacon.
Well, as you might guess, my chosen path has some geography in connection with it. And the basis for my chosen path was that in the summer of 1967, as a fairly new young librarian, a children's librarian, I got to attend the annual conference of the American Library Association. It was held in June in San Francisco, and I fell in love with a beautiful and literally cool city. And when you come from Baltimore in the summer or anywhere back east, San Francisco feels very good. Now, after attending the conference, I went down to Southern California to visit a cousin and his family. And we did all those wonderful things you do in Southern California. You go to Disneyland, and we had small boys, so we went there, and we went to the what was it, Scott, the berry farm, and we went to a mission, and even went to the Huntington Museum. But of course, we didn't take the little boys to that. I don't think they would have been too impressed. And I came home, and that was that, I thought. Well, the next summer, I joined a friend who was originally from Amarillo, Texas. And I don't know if there's anybody from Texas here or from Amarillo, but this friend, Shirley Ammons, and her sister, Carol, had a plan. They would move every 3 or 4 years to another part of the country, away, as far away from Texas, I think, as they could get. And they had lived first on the East Coast, and then they moved to Denver. So in the summer of 1968, my vacation was visiting them in Denver, and we drove around to the Yellowstone and the other national parks in the area, and they said, you know where we're going to go next in 1970? We're going to go to the San Francisco Bay Area, and you ought to come with us. And I thought, well, why not? And I had plenty of time to plan. So I wrote to some libraries in the area, And they said they didn't have anything for me. And fortunately, the library where I worked in Baltimore, the Enoch Pratt Free Library, is a wonderful library. And people go there to be trained and then go off somewhere else. And so one of my supervisors said, you know, Miss Virginia Hughes works at the California State Library, and she used to work here, right, Miss Hughes? So I wrote Miss Hughes, and she told me about 3 vacant positions in the whole state at that time for an experienced children's librarian. So I got out a map of California, and one was near San Diego, and one was near Santa Barbara, but the third one was the closest to San Francisco. It was in Sacramento. I didn't know anything about Sacramento except it was the capital, but I wrote to the library and they said, well, when you get here, we'll schedule an interview because we've got a couple of positions you might be interested in. So I flew to Amarillo, and from there we drove through, saw the Grand Canyon, then went up through Nevada, drove into California on Route 80. It had snowed, the mountains covered with snow, Donner Lake frozen. It was beautiful. We made our headquarters in San Mateo at a motel on 101. And after I'd been here a week, I had an interview scheduled with Sacramento Public Library, but I had an interview scheduled the next day with San Francisco Public Library. Because of course, I still had this dream of living in San Francisco. Even in 1970, I think I would have had to have 5 roommates, but to be able to afford it, but still. So anyway, I came up on the Greyhound bus to Sacramento. And the interview was relatively easy. It was with the assistant director of the library at that time, the coordinator of children's services, and a lady so elderly, I thought she should have been retired. She worked in the personnel office. They took me out to see this lovely new library that was going to open in about 2 months, named in memory and honor of Dr. Martin Luther King. But after we saw that, they said, well, we'll show you a little bit of Sacramento. And we're going to show you this really nice area, and then we'll go to the ghetto. So I'm ready. And we go to a very nice area. It's a lovely area. I found out later it was the fabulous 40s. Of course it was nice. Then we drove to another area. There were the houses were much smaller, but they had yards and flowers were blooming because this time it was late February. And some of the houses even had fences around the yards. I thought, well, that's nice too. And then I waited for the ghetto. And I waited and waited. And we got back to the library administration building. And I thought, well, I don't want to show that I'm stupid. So I didn't say, where's the ghetto? And they offered me a job. But of course, I had that interview next day with San Francisco Public Library. So I said, I'll have to get back to you. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Well, the interview with San Francisco Public Library was with some man in the personnel office who said, we don't have anything for you. So I went down to the lobby of the Central Library, the San Francisco Central Library, got on the phone, and they gave me the director to talk to, who I had not met the day before. And she said, well, I don't know. I think that position, it could be filled. I'll have to get back to you tomorrow. Well, now, having been on her side in conducting interviews, I know the game she was playing, but I didn't know it at that time. And I thought, what in the world am I going to do if I don't get this job? My money, I'm living off my state of Maryland retirement money. I don't want to go back east with, my head down and my hands empty. Well, the next day she called back and she said, the position is still available. So I accepted it. And about a week later, came up on the Greyhound bus again. And I thought, I'm going to do this for I'll stay here for probably 4 years or 5 years. I was an only child. My parents are getting older. I'd be going back to Maryland eventually. And here I am 52 years later. So California was definitely my chosen path.
Thank you, Terry. The children of Sacramento were very lucky to have her as a children's director for many years.
Yes.
Well, our next teller is Mark Berry. I've known Mark Berry for several years, and I've always been very impressed with his skills He's been active in establishing the Winter Festival held annually in Auburn, California. Please welcome Mark Berry.
Joyce, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be a member of the Sacramento Guild. The story I bring today is an ancient story. It's been told thousands of times by thousands of different tellers, and with respect to them all. Once upon a time, in a land of Japan, before that land was visited by ships from other lands, there was a class in the society called the samurai. The samurai was a warrior. The samurai was such a warrior that no one could stand up to the samurai. The samurai had started at a very young age, learning all there was to know about all of the martial arts, became an expert in the use of the bow and the arrow, but most expert in the use of the katana. The katana is the longer sword. You may have seen the stacks of Japanese swords. That's called the battle sword, the katana. On this particular day, on a well-traveled path just outside of the town, many people were coming and going, and coming down the path was a samurai. And he was a large man, especially by Japanese standards. And he just looked to be someone who was well worn of many battles. And everyone stepped to the side of the road when the samurai came along. And he got to the building over there, and he went up and he rapped on the door of the building very unceremoniously. And when the door slid, there was this little monk in his little monk robe. And he said, "How may I help you?" And the samurai said, "Monk, I seek knowledge. I would have you teach me of the nature of heaven and of hell." And the little monk looked at this fierce warrior and said, "Well, I'm working in the garden today, and that's how we feed ourselves, so I don't have time. And even if I did have time, I'm sure I couldn't teach you anything because you're so full of yourself. There's no room for anything else in there anyway." And as you can imagine, the samurai was enraged. His eyes were bulging, his teeth were clenched, his neck was corded, his face was red. He had never been so insulted in his entire life. Twice before, he had killed human beings for far less insult than he had had today. And in an instant, all of this happened, and he drew his katana, and he thought he could get that insolent little monk in about 3 pieces before the first piece hit the ground. And just as the katana started to arc through the air, the little monk raised his finger and said, "This is hell." And the samurai was, with his skills, he was able to stop from beheading the monk in midair. And he got it right down to his toenails. This is hell. And something he did that he had never done, no other samurai had ever done. He sheathed his katana without drawing blood. It's never done. And he realized in this moment of awe that he was certainly standing in front of the wisest person he had ever even heard of in his entire life. And certainly to give what he had given, and at the very risk of his own life, he was certainly standing in front of the bravest person that he had ever met, even his opponents, even his teachers, this little monk. And the samurai started to bow. And we all know that bowing is not uncommon in Japan, but not like this bow. The samurai went into the lowest, the most humble bow that he had ever done in his life. Even that time when he had been presented to the shogun, he had not bowed this respectfully. And just when the samurai was at the lowest and most humble stage of his bow, the little monk raised that finger once again and said, "This is heaven." And that moment changed the chosen path of that samurai.
Thank you, Mark. I love the stories. Are we all on the same path? How about your path? What are you thinking? Left, right, up, down? I know I've taken a path or two, and I learned in storytelling when I started to work on stories, especially personal stories. I looked back and realized I always thought I was well planned. I did what I wanted to do, but I found out chance and taking a path that wasn't the best path in the world opened up worlds for me. Our next person is a poet. I'm very happy to welcome Todd Boyd on our program today. He's well known in the poetry world within Sacramento and I think beyond, but I can't promise you. Todd.
Thank you. This is the first time I've been back to the Poetry Center. Oh, the blue table. All right. For a couple of years now, so it's a real pleasure. This is called The Chosen Path, on the way to Elko, Nevada, traveling with my 3 regrets. That's the theme of this day of storytelling and poetry, though it does seem to me that in my life, it's the path that chooses me. It's neither one way or another, neither one path or the other. It's many, and some bad, some good, some new, some old and tired. And as I near the end of my trail, I sometimes just softly tread on with stealthy feet, and other times more wisely cautious, looking back and forward, imbibing the savory sweet smell of my past or future living. I contemplate the thread of my cowboy history as I cross the high plains of Nevada toward a place called Elko and the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, where despite a wintry cold and midnight rambling of the train, I will walk up to the lonely mic and say my piece. Choosing one path is difficult for me to conceive. I wasn't made for such heavy lifting. For me, it seems there's enough rough road in every perfect plan that should keep us from believing in anything but hope. I'm an artist who took a while to realize there is a point of no return. Everything goes with me to the grave, as macabre as Poe it might sound. Everything I created will lie fallow in the hearts and temporary minds passing through time. And every wisdom I ever spoke will fall silent within my throat, only to be reborn and misunderstood by the next generation, and so on and so on. Each generation, rather than a new future, it's the same old path. We all travel the same worn trail. Yes, my path chose me, a rocky one indeed. But the longer I travel along these roads, the more beautiful the world outside of man becomes, less like pushing a boulder up a hill, more as a simple bottle of wine in the garden of paradise called my backyard. As the woes of man continually are cast in front of our feet like a minefield of travail. I hear nothing above nor below in the blowing winds of change, or never minds, try again next times. I thought, I sought, I looked, I searched. I did not find an honest man like Diogenes. I stumbled in the dark when the lights burnt out until I eventually could sing my way free as the sirens of my youthful promises. I just had to be patient, and I was. So no matter, I still had 3 regrets. So I step up to the mic at the Cowboy Poetry Festival in Elko, Nevada, and this is my time, my 3 regrets. Sometimes traveling down memory lane, sometimes can be like getting stuck on the LA freeway. Sometimes like a horse and buggy ride on a smooth country road, or sometimes like speeding and weaving down a muddy dirt trail in a 4-wheel drive. I remember that time I got up at the Cowboy Poetry Festival and said my piece and admitted that I had 3 big regrets in my long and satisfactory life thus far. My first regret was I never learned to ride a horse. And that seemed to be like delivering a curse on my likability. So halfway through my second piece, when I had to sing a cowboy song, I had to admit my second regret was I never learned to properly play a guitar. And now I figured I'd done gone too far. And so what kind of cowboy could I be, my listeners might be asking? Because even the TV cowboy I was raised up on knew how to ride and carry a tune on their guitar. About the end of my disgrace, I wanted to say something about my fate, about working hard for Western Pacific and never riding an iron horse either, but being part of making sure it never left its tracks and delivering the freight from town to city to shore to other countries I've never seen was something I took pride in. But when I taught the kids where they came from, their history, both good and bad, so they can think on their own way clearer and for themselves to believe in their own God, country, and family, the main measures of any man or woman. The God who watches over those of us and you, making sure we all understand it's life we all must sometimes suffer through and laugh our way to. And death is the final word. No matter how important we think we are, we have to reckon on how we treated our own private truths, the memories we passed on to the ones we love. As for the country, it's not just the nation's birth, its rise and fall of our strengths and misdeeds and the hard land a cowboy has to work and the dirt we all share on this planet Earth. We are the protectors and must always remember we're getting it on loan and it's not given to any of us to own because the next generation and the one after that has as much right to be able to live and love as much as we do in our own time. And next comes the family, the most important part of a cowboy's work and the one the devil takes the most to task. Family is so much like the seeds of the plants and trees and offsprings of animals getting the care they need to try and live a good life, learning how to respect other men and women, not to judge nor make suffering for others who for whatever reason aren't like you, to give them the tools to work and make their decisions before going off on their own when they're grown. On and on, life goes on that way. So the cowboy and the cowgirl too has all the makings of living a good, hard working life. And if everyone, cowboy or unlike, took that way to their heart, the world could be even a better place and it wouldn't hurt America neither. So vaya con Dios and adios. It turns out my third regret is I never properly learned to speak Spanish.
Thank you, Todd. I have to tell you about, my dedicated choices. I was going to college. It was my third year. I only had 8 units to go. I was going to summer school and I met a young principal in line waiting for, you line up at 3 o'clock in the morning back then to get into the classes you wanted. And he talked to me for a while and he said, I need a 3rd grade teacher. Sure you do. So I thought he was just leading up to a date. But I was wrong. He brought a contract with money on it. And I looked and I thought about it and I went home and I said, I don't want to go to Cool. Who wants to go to Cool? What are they doing Cool? My mother says, oh, don't worry about it. Just, if you really think that he's sincere, give him some districts around here a call. I did. I called 5 districts, got 4 interviews, took one, and became an elementary teacher. The worst choice in my life. I had a terrible principal who took advantage of a young girl. I was just barely 21. I turned 21 in August and went to work in September. And I came from a working class family, which said, do what the boss says unless it's illegal. Well, most of what he asked me to do wasn't illegal. It was just unfortunate. So I quit and I wasn't going to teach anymore. I was going to go back and get my degree in home economics. I was going to get a master's. I was going to go back to Davis. When I went to a large shower in Clarksburg, where I had gone to school. Now, if you go to school in a town like Clarksburg, everybody in the town knows what your business is about. And the secretary of the superintendent, also the principal of the high school, who knew me, whispered, and I went on talking to my friends and laughing. On her way out, she tapped me on the shoulder. She said, I have an interview with the superintendent at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Thank you. I went home and I talked to my mother. What am I going to do? She's my friend. She thought she was helping. My mother said, go and talk. It won't hurt you. You've always wanted to teach. Okay. So I went and talked. And I spent the next 40 years teaching elementary school in Clarksburg, California. Chosen paths? Not really. They were forced, but I took them anyway, and I'm glad I did. Our next storyteller is a wonderful. She's been telling stories since the last century. Weaves tales of magic, humor, compassion, wisdom, wonder, and misadventures. Today's story is a little bit of all of these. Please welcome Linda Kennedy.
Lindarella. Mark is the second person who named me Lindarella, but actually that's a really good name for me. Bibbidi bobbidi boo. I am going to tell today a fairy tale written by Jane Yolen, and I have received permission from Jane to tell the story. Tom, a young man, was heading down this path looking for his future, his fortune and his future as it happened. And he was going down the road for several days. And one day the sun had moved over across the sky. He was getting tired. He saw ahead of him a big shade tree. And he said, when I get to that tree, I'm going to settle down and rest a little while. But when he got to that tree, he found that the road he was on forked this way and that. And there in that at the bottom of that tree was just a small patch of shade, and an old man was there sleeping. So he sat down off to the side and he waited for that old man to wake up. And when that old man woke up and saw Tom sitting there, he motioned for him to come and sit by him. And Tom said, no, 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 I want you to tell me which way I need to go. I am in search of my future, my fortune. And I need you to tell me, do I go this way or do I go that way? Now the old man, he cupped his ear and he looked down that right side and he said, you know, my hearing isn't as good as it used to be, but there were times when I could hear the grass grow. And Tom said, I'm sure those were wonderful days, but tell me, do I go this way or do I go that way? And the old man, he looked down that way and he said, my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, but there were times when I could see the wind. And Tom said, I'm sure those were great times, but tell me, I'm in search of my fortune. Tell me, do I go this way or do I go that way? And the old man stood up and he said, he says, all I can say is the best thing is go to somewhen. And with that, he walked around the tree and disappeared. Well, the young man sat down under the tree. He rested a while and he got up and he still did not know, was he going to go this way or that? He decided the right path was on the right. Off he went. And he walked for days. He walked for weeks. He walked for months looking for someone. And each day as he looked, he had an adventure. There were days when he climbed mountains and marveled at the views. There were days he went down to the ocean and he went diving for pearls. Sometimes he got one. There were days when he was exploring caves. There were days when he actually was mining for gold. All that while looking for someone which was drifting further and further back in a cloud in his memories. Now, one day, he was in a little village and there was an outside cafe. He sat down to get something to eat and he noticed a lovely young lady serving there. He thought her hair was so golden, it looked like it had been kissed by the sun. Her hands were so gentle, they were perfect for rocking a cradle. And you know, they fell in love. You know, they got married. And he built a house with land all around for them to have a garden where they grew lots of food to feed all the children that eventually year after year filled that house. One day, old Tom, the grandfather now, was sitting in front of the fireplace in his rocking chair. And a grandchild climbed up on his lap and he said, Grandpa, Grandpa, tell us about the times when you were young and all the adventures you had. And he thought, and he says, well, did I ever tell you about the mountain I climbed? Did I ever tell you about when I went diving for pearls? How about when I went mining for gold? How about all of these adventures he had? He said, but you know, probably all of these adventures came because I traveled some when I was, I traveled some when I was young. Was that what that old man was telling me? A few days later, he was out working in his garden. The shade of the tree beckoned him and he went and he sat down in front of it. He pulled his hat down over his eyes. But before he could go to sleep, a young man walked up to him. Old man, tell me, am I on the right path? I am looking for my fortune. And old Tom, he looked up and he watched the clouds drifting across the sky. And he said, well, son, the best I can say is somewhen. And he pulled that cap down over his eyes and fell asleep.
Thank you, Linda. Well, I have a little time, so I'm going to tell you another of my chosen paths. I'd only been teaching about 3 years, and I had 2 roommates, Mary Jo and Marie. And Marie read where there was the Federal Trust Territories of Micronesia were looking for teachers, and she wanted to go and teach for the federal government. I didn't want to go. She didn't want to go alone. I went with her. Well, it was wonderful. I have to tell you, I was deep into skin diving. I had in the back of my mind, I had an idea I might change path again and go back to college and become an oceanographer or a marine biologist. But I wasn't thinking of that very seriously. Anyway, so I went with her, and it was description. It was Micronesia and the trust territories, and they were looking for teachers. And the only really central place was Saipan. And you could teach at the high school there, and they had, doctors and everything, and was cars. And then that was level 1. And then level 2, you could go out to the islands where you had a walkie-talkie kind of arrangement, and a boat came once a week to give you supplies and so forth. And then there was level 3, way out on the outer islands, where there was no communication except shortwave radio in a case of an emergency. They delivered things once a month. And to teach school was not really what you would think teaching school was about. It was trying to expose the people who lived there that there was an outside world that they might have to learn to deal with. And so you taught whoever showed up, which might be the elders, who might be little kids, whatever came, you were to try to encourage English and try to encourage the idea that everyone came to school once a day. And what they said with that was, good luck. They didn't expect much of you except to live there and try to communicate and get everybody involved in the idea of what it was going to be like after World War II, I guess. Anyway, so I applied. And they said, we don't send single women to level 3. I said, that's okay. That's the only place I want to go. So I put 3. And I said, and he said, we'll just throw it away. I said, fine, that's okay. I wouldn't change to level 2 or level 1. I didn't see any reason to leave Clarksburg for level 1 in Saipan. So I didn't tell anyone, especially my parents, that I had done this. You understand why. I'm 20, let's see, I'm 23 now. I'm getting old. Well, what happened was I had to go to a notary. They notarized it. I mailed it back. 2 weeks after I sent that back, my mother's doctor called my father and I in to the office and informed us that my mother's colon cancer had metastasized and was now in her brain and her lungs. The one in the lungs would not operate it, and that she had 3 to 6 months to live. My departure for the Micronesian Islands was in August. I said, what am I going to do? Mary Jo says, you can't go. I said, but I signed a contract. They could hold me to it. She said, write a very compelling, give them the doctor's name and the doctor's phone number to verify it. So I did, and I got a letter back excusing me, saying that I could come back the next year if I'd send them a letter. I never went back. I continued to teach at Clarksburg. And guess what? Just recently, I've gone online, and those atolls that I was supposed to go to now have resorts on them. So I have a goal now, a new path. By the time I'm 85, I'm going to be physically fit to go on that trip. And that's it. Now I would like to introduce you to Angela James, our premier storyteller. Oh, that's me? Yeah. That's you. I have been so efficient, I'm finishing a little bit faster, been scribbling notes in between. Thank you. Okay, everybody is so quiet. Hi, everybody. Okay. Let's get